Welcome to Sex Ed with DB. I'm your host, DB. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the podcast. If you love and support the work that we do, head to www.sexedwithdb.com and buy some of our hot new merch. Follow us on Instagram at sexedwithdbpodcast. And if you want to advertise with us, shoot us an email at sexedwithdb@gmail.com. In today's episode, I delve into youth advocacy in Texas and reproductive justice education with the wonderfully brilliant and inspirational Leslie Lopez. You may recognize her name because she's Sex Ed with DB's former social media intern, and we were so lucky to have her. She's incredible. Leslie is a first-generation Black Mexican-American residing in North Texas, and she's the host of Tahana Feminist Talks, a podcast centered on learning about social justice topics and unlearning harmful ways of thinking. Leslie is a reproductive justice educator and currently works in communications and fundraising at a national reproductive justice organization. You can find her on Instagram at Tahana Feminist and the podcast at TF Talks Podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Give it up for Leslie. Want to tie your partner up in bed but don't know where to start? When you want to get a little frisky and brighten up your sex life, try Emojibator's new rainbow bondage rope, safe for restraint and suspension. Whether it be their classic emoji vibrators, silly pasties, or fab beauty products, Emojibator will deliver. Find all of their body-safe toys for pleasure at emojibator.com and use code SEXEDWITHDB for 25% off your purchase. Follow them on Instagram at Emojibator. Have you had trouble getting birth control during quarantine? Meet Pandia Health. By people with uteruses, for people with uteruses, and led by a doctor, Pandia Health makes your life easier by bringing birth control by mail. Pandia Health offers free and confidential delivery of the pill, so you don't have to go out of your way to get the healthcare you need. Skip the trip to the pharmacy. Go to pandiahealth.com. That's PANDIA health.com. and use code SEXEDFREE to get a free telemedicine appointment for the first 50 people who sign up. Follow them on Instagram at Pandia Health. Offer only valid in Arizona, California, Florida, Texas, and Wyoming. Creating a homemade dildo or a usable copy of your own penis is rapidly turning into the new standard in ultra-custom sex toys, thanks to Clone-A-Willy. Clone-A-Willy has been all about dick since '96 and brings you a DIY penis or vulva molding kit for your favorite sex toy or memento. Whether it be for a birthday, Hanukkah, or just because, Clone-A-Willy is the perfect gift. Use promo code SEXED20 for 20% off your purchase at www.cloneawilly.com. Follow them on Instagram at Clone-A-Willy-Kit. Leslie, hi. I'm such a loser. Welcome to the podcast. Hello, Leslie. I can't believe we have you on. You're the freaking best. How are you?
Oh my God, I'm so good. I'm really excited to be doing this. What an honor, truly.
Oh my God, the honor is all mine, Les Dog. Okay, let's begin by you sharing your name, your pronouns, and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Leslie Lopez. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am a reproductive justice educator. And I'm currently working at a repro org where I do communications and development work. But like on the side, I'm also the host of Tahana Feminist Talks, which is a podcast that I'm sure I'll be able to talk a little bit more about later.
Yes, you will. And what's the name? What's the name of the organization that you work for?
I work for All Options. So they're a nonprofit that basically provides people support through all of their parenting, pregnancy, abortion, and adoption experiences. So we're very much like here to support people through all of their like reproductive experiences and the feelings that come with that.
Incredible. As some of you may know, who are listening, Leslie is in our credits because she was our social media intern, and we got to know Leslie very well this summer, and we are so in awe of her and are so excited to delve deep into your story and your passion. So grateful that you're working with us this summer on the podcast, and really lucky to be able to get to know you a little bit better today. Let's get into your background. How did you become passionate about repro justice? What was your like aha moment, if you had one?
Yeah, so I really like to define things before I like get into them, so we're all on the same page. So reproductive justice, for those who are not aware, is a term that was coined in 1994 by 12 Black women, because the reproductive rights movement was not taking into account that abortion being legal is not the same thing as having access to abortion. But not only that, but Black, Brown, and Indigenous people still face other systemic issues. And so the sister song definition is that reproductive justice, is a human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we do have in safe and sustainable communities. So that kind of like encompasses a lot of different things. But like that aside, my personal like background is that I'm a first generation Black Mexican American. My mom is from San Luis Potosi, which is in Mexico, and my dad is from Dallas, Texas. But I was raised by my mom's family in a really religious household. And I feel like that's kind of how I entered into like social justice and like repro work without even knowing. Um, since I didn't get the sex education I needed at school, or at home, I mean, we didn't talk about sex like ever. I remember when I got my first period, I was like in elementary school, and I was so excited for some reason.
Yes.
And I remember I remember telling my grandma, I was like, "You're not gonna believe this," and she was like, "We will not tell anyone." And I was like, "Oh,
no."
Yeah, and it was just like really, I don't know, like just from the get-go there was like a lot of like shame around like bodies, and that like I definitely like carried that with me. And as I got older, I got like more problems with like menstruation. So I have endometriosis, and I didn't know this until I was 17. But because of that, I like started going to a gynecologist when I was like 12 or 13, and I was put on birth control. And my mom was like, "We cannot tell anyone about this. Like, if this gets around in church." And I was like, "What are you talking about?"
Oh.
Yeah. And it was like looking back, I just think of like the different times throughout my life when, having a comprehensive sex education, whether that have been provided by my family or at school, would have really helped me feel more confident and also feel like very at peace with my body, because I feel like I've just had like a lot of trouble with that stems from like just not ever talking about these things. But yeah, so like I didn't have like one aha moment. There was like multiple, and I think that when I finally got to college and got actually like applied to this reproductive justice internship program called the Reproductive Rights Activist Service Corps, and they like flew me out to go to this conference in Massachusetts, and like there like I remember going to like panels and workshops that were about like environmental justice and like LGBTQ plus liberation and all this stuff. And like they really pieced it together for me. And I was just like, oh my God, like this is like my political home. Um, so yeah, I mean, just a lot of different things that like led up to this moment. And then like since then, I've just been educating and advocating. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all that, Leslie.
Of
And
course.
that's so sad that like so many people share your story of like getting your first
Mm-hmm.
period, or when you like first wanted to have sex, or when, there are so many firsts that like young people go through that are not supported by family members. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
sentiment is one that many people can understand and agree that like most people don't get the care and the support that they need, not only in schools, but at home because of religion, because of taboos. So I think your story is one that definitely resonates with others listening.
Mhm.
Okay, let's talk about what you're currently working on, which is activism around the Texas State Board of Education's revisions to the state's sex ed curriculum.
Mhm.
Can you talk about what's going on in Texas and how it's progressing, how folks who are listening can support this work?
Yeah. Okay, so what's currently happening is like really monumental. So whenever I tell people in other states to like guess when the last time that the Texas State Board of Education revised our current sex ed curriculum, people are usually like, oh, like 5 years ago or like 10 years ago. But the truth is that the curriculum hasn't been updated since 1997.
Oh,
Um,
oopsies, that's too
yeah.
long.
I was born in 1998, so
Ah, Leslie.
it there's like we're laughing, right? Because it's like that terrible that like it really has not been updated. And the thing is that the current curriculum is like lacking so much already. And so it's like a great disservice to people, especially like young people who maybe are getting like some sex education in school, because the reality is here in Texas most of us are not. It's abstinence only if our like school district decides to teach us. And I have like, I mean, I've heard it all, like, you know, people saying that like their teacher put like Cheetos in water and was like, would you drink the water? It's like, no. Okay, yeah, exactly, like that's what it's like to have sex, like no one wants you, like
Oh,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
the
right.
not the Cheetos, like literally anything else.
It's like I feel like people here go to such extremes to really shame and like stigmatize so many things revolving around sex education. And like we see the consequences of that every day. Like um yeah, so like right now we're advocating for significant changes specifically about contraception, and like other forms besides condoms, and like pros and cons so people can really make the decisions for themselves. We're also advocating for STI prevention and consent and sexual violence prevention. And actually, in the last testimony hearing, there was a lot of pushback for consent, which was like really mind blowing. Currently, the curriculum does not include a definition of consent. And one of the board members at the last hearing called it a red flag word and said that it was associated with pedophilia and sex trafficking and grooming.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, where did this person get their information from? Like, are they okay? Like, that's completely incorrect.
Yeah, and like it's so absurd because it's like, well, I can tell you didn't get comprehensive sex ed because here you are on the
Case in
board.
point.
Yeah, exactly. Like you've proven my point. Do I have to keep going? And you know, like we're also advocating to add abortion and sexual orientation slash gender identity information to the curriculum because both of those things are not on there whatsoever. Like there's no mention of abortion. Um, or any information that would be helpful to LGBTQ plus youth. And it's like growing up, I saw myself not reflected in that. I know many of my peers didn't as well. And so it's like, cool, the current sex education that you can get in Texas is like abstinence only, right? So you're going to be shamed. You're going to be stigmatized. If you're LGBTQ plus, you're not going to be included. So like what exactly is the point of this? Because we know like young people have sex, like we know that. So it's just like really harmful, not just the way that it's talked about, but also like the way that it isn't talked about. And I think like waiting 20 plus years for this to be like revised is already long enough. And obviously the time where they decide to revise it is during a pandemic. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is trying to get people to understand why this is really important, um, and like why they need to show up.
Yeah. Can you talk through a little bit like what it's like? Like what are these hearings? Like what how do you find out about them? Like how many happen until an actual decision is made? Like I want to hear like on the ground what that looks like.
Yeah. So right now there's two organizations that have really been like taking the lead with this, and that's how I got involved. One of them is the Texas Freedom Network, and the other one is Jane's Due Process. And so at the end of June, it was like the first testimony hearing. And the way I found out about it was through Twitter, and like I follow a lot of like organizers, and people were saying like, oh, like there's going to be a hearing where you can give testimony to advocate for all the changes that we want in sex ed. And I was like, hold up, what is happening? Like, why is this such short notice? But like, do we actually need to ask? Like, obviously, like if not a lot of people know about it, not a lot of people show up to testify, and we
Exactly.
just
They get
move
their way.
on. Yeah. And I was really lucky to be able to like sign up to testify. And that first hearing, there was over 10 hours of testimony. So more than 150 people testified, and each person has 2 minutes.
Two?
And
That's so.
yeah.
I was trying to do the math in my head, like those like the geometry, like kind of like math, like meme, like that's what was happening in my
Mm-hmm.
head. 2 minutes is nothing.
Yeah, it's literally nothing. And so you essentially have to tell like your story, why, like move them to like make a change in those 2 minutes. And it's like, what? And also, like, there's not just people testifying for revisions, there's people testifying against these revisions. And so you have some like really wacky people going off about like, oh, consent means this or that. And it's like, what are you saying? Like, do you like, what, where are you getting this information from? And there was even this one person who was like very like homophobic, transphobic, was just like not having it. And like everyone else has to sit through this, right? And like listen to like these people who do not want young people in Texas to have access to comprehensive sex ed. Or like there was even like people talking about like their own abortion stories, like having to go through the judicial bypass process, like having to go out of state because there was like a lot of restrictions, or like the closest clinic to them was not like around the corner from like where they live, like things like that. um and like it's very clear like that the um current board is like predominantly Republican and conservative.
And is this
There's
the Board of Education in Texas?
Yeah, this is a state board of education. Yeah. So I think there's 15 seats, and I believe like 8 of them maybe are like um Republican, like, and so it's like, yeah, it's just very clear that like they're trying to push an agenda on like the rest of the state. Um but anyways, back to that first hearing. People testified like, I think it was like past midnight. I remember I testified at 10 p.m. and my original time was at like 5:45 or something
Oh
like
my
that.
god.
Yeah, and then they bring in like experts, and it's like, you're not an expert. Come on, like this person is like, you somehow managed to like find them on like Craigslist or something. Like, what are you doing? And yeah, so it's like you have to sit through that, and then fine, like people are able to testify, and we really made it clear the types of changes that we wanted to see. And then in early September, they're like, okay, we're gonna have another testimony hearing, and we're gonna present like the draft so far. And they presented this draft. There was like some significant changes, but again, like no mention about abortion or sexual orientation or gender identity. And then the State Board of Education also says that they will not allow people to speak after 9 p.m. So we spent 10 hours last time, like giving testimony. And I think like the time slot for this was like 5 or 6 hours. Like it was not a lot. And so again, like trying to get people to like sign up to testify. The day of, like was like really wild. I mean, essentially, like, people are just waiting for their turn. And it was like not the first item on the agenda. So there was like other stuff being covered. And yeah, the Texas Freedom Network, they were like, if they don't let people testify after like 9 p.m., we're gonna have our own hearing. So they had the people's hearing, and it's over an hour long. You can watch it on their Facebook. And yeah, so like regardless of whether the people who represent us wanted to hear us, like, we were still out there, like, saying what we needed to say and letting people know that, like, this is not just something that they can sweep under the rug. So yeah, I mean, essentially it's like an all-day thing. It just randomly happens, but there's also like other actions taking place throughout. So like a lot of encouraging people to write letters to the editor, to like their local newspaper. Right after, like, there was like a Twitter storm towards the representative or the board member who was saying all that stuff about consent. So yeah, it's pretty wild.
Big yikes. Major yikes, and serious kudos for you and everyone else who is really making steps for change. That cannot be easy to like present to people who are like unwilling and unable to like really understand you and hear you. And the fact, like, I got chills when you were like, if the people who are representing us like are not gonna take us seriously or hear what we have to say, we're going to do it anyway, and we'll create the space and like we'll create the community to do that. And then the last question I have on that though is like, when do they decide? Like, is that coming up soon? Like, when is that?
Yeah, so they actually decide, I think it's the second or third week of November. And I was under the impression there would be another like time to give testimony, like to testify against whatever changes or for, being optimistic. But that's not happening. So I believe that once those changes are made and they have their final draft, we'll be able to see it. But I actually really don't want to speak on if it will like immediately be implemented or what exactly will happen. But like I said, Texas Freedom Network and Jane's Due Process do a really good job of keeping people up to date on what's happening. So if there are folks who are listening who are in Texas and are interested, I really recommend like following them and staying up to date, because they will send out like action alerts. Like, I know that there is different like texting opportunities, like texting people to like vote for or not vote for certain board members, because like a lot of the positions are going to be up for re-election. So yeah, I mean, honestly, just staying up to date and like understanding that like this is what's currently happening. Like, there's a lot of stuff happening in the world right now, but like this is also really important. And so I really do recommend people like find a way to just stay up to date.
Would you ever think about running?
I don't know.
Is that a honestly, kooky question?
I don't think so, to be honest, because I feel like there's a lot of like compromising you must have to do. And I feel like being a reproductive justice educator, I've been able to see like change happening like in front of my eyes, like just with providing people the space to like learn from each other. And so I feel like in a way that's slightly more valuable than like doing this, but I'm still gonna do it because I still think that like, I don't know, I just think like electoral politics is like very like
garbage. You can't see... Is that the word?
Garbage.
Garbaggio. Absolutely, bro.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. Yes, yeah. So it's like, there's like things happening outside of like
the this system.
Like, yeah, exactly. And I've had conversations with like family members and like community members, and I feel like when you talk to people instead of at them, like there's like a lot more that you can do, like a lot more opportunities to create change. So
Yeah, let's get into that really quickly because I have some questions around like your organizing background. So you amazingly defined reproductive justice in the beginning of this interview, which I really appreciate. But I'm also wondering, like, what is reproductive justice education and why is it such an essential part of organizing?
yeah, so like I was saying before, like whenever you create a space where people can learn from each other, I think like that is really valuable. Um, and so that's what I mean when I say reproductive justice education. Um, Having this space where people are able to ask questions and learn not from someone directly, because I feel like this has happened to me before, like being seen as someone who knows a lot about reproductive justice and is like almost like the point person, right? If you have a question, just go ask Leslie. And it's like, well, what if we all learn so that like we don't have to do this, but also like I don't know everything. Um, and I think that like reproductive justice, I mean, it encompasses like abortion access, but also disability justice, like abolition, environmental justice, like LGBTQ plus justice. Like there's so much stuff that falls under this. And so I don't know, I think like this is important because everyone has to start somewhere. And I also think that education is just incredibly important regardless of what movement space you're in, because everyone has to be on the same page. And I just don't really see like the value in like having someone say, oh, I know everything, come ask me, and like gatekeep that information, if that makes sense. Um,
It's collective.
so yeah, exactly. And I think within reproductive justice, I've noticed that like the movement really values community and like all of our like collective liberations. And so it just would not make sense. Like it would not be inherently like reproductive justice-y to like gatekeep, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. You are
Mm-hmm.
so wise, Leslie. So
Oh,
wise, and I love
thank you.
learning from you and with you. It's a real treat.
Oh, thank you.
Moving right along. So, fans of our Instagram account will have
Mm-hmm.
most definitely seen your amazing infographics about reproductive, social justice, etc. Tell me about your different approaches. You know, you make graphics, you have a podcast, which will come up in a couple questions, and you do student education, you do organizing. Like, how do you find all of these things that come together to really make knowledge accessible to people and to young people?
Yeah. Um, so I've been on like social media since like I don't know, like I was in like middle school. No, I think like fifth grade to be honest. Like
You
it's
dog.
definitely that 10-year-old that like made an account that was like, I was born in 1908 or something, you know? Um, but because I've grown up with it, I've seen how important of a vessel it is for like dispersing information.
Mm-hmm.
And actually last year in like July of like 2019, um, I felt like really moved to like create a space or like to try to use my Instagram platform to like educate people on reproductive justice. And it wasn't because like I have a big following or anything, because I definitely don't, but
Hey,
it
it's
was
not
just
it's
like
not small. You're climbing. You're climbing up there.
it's not like sex ed with TV TikTok, you know, but like
Okay, that was literally your doing also. Don't be
no,
fooled.
don't
Leslie will
stop.
blow up your TikTok.
Oh my god. No, like I was I had like just finished, I think like my first year being involved in like reproductive justice. And I found myself to have like accidentally been gatekeeping information. And I didn't want to do that. Like I just like kind of had like this realization that was like, oh, this is something I'm doing and like it feels really gross. And so then I was like, okay, well like let's do something about it. Like I'm not just going to like feel bad and like, you know, like self-pity, like let's actually do something. So I like started doing research on like the different topics that are often talked about within reproductive justice that I thought were important for people to know. So then I started making these like infographics on Canva, and the first few were kind of rough, but like I got into it, and people were actually like, "Oh, thank you so much. Like this is like really informative." And I was like, "Great, this is great." And at that time I hadn't seen that a lot like on Instagram. Like I know now there's a lot of
Yeah, it's
infographics.
popular.
Yeah, which I think has its pros and cons, because one of the like cons of it is like oversimplifying information, which is like
That is true.
truly like one of my like nightmares, to like oversimplify and condense things so much that they really like lose the history, which I feel like, I mean, like the parallel is like being in school and reading like US history. Like you don't get everything. You
Right.
get like very limited view. Um so then I was like, okay, well, like what else can I do? And I was already like doing student education at this time, because I really wanted people on campus, like on my university campus, to find their own political home, or something that they could call a political home. And I had always wanted to start a podcast. I actually remember coming across Sex Ed with TV, and I was like, oh my god, this is great. Like literally binge listened. And I remember like it was like so great. And I was like, okay, this is like amazing. What can I do to like deliver information to people about reproductive justice, but like reproductive justice in Texas? Because I think a lot of people really like diss Texas and are like, oh, like, like all this like terrible stuff going on down there. And I'm like, yeah, but there's people organizing. Like you don't see this,
Right.
but Texas is huge, and there's communities that are organizing for change everywhere. And so I was like, okay, like I'll run with that, but at the same time I still want to like have a space where I can openly make mistakes, which was so scary, because I'm like perfectionist, like trademark. But I was like, okay, fine, like we'll do this. But I also think when you openly make mistakes, it's almost like it allows other people to do so as well, and to like be okay with that, and to acknowledge like, okay, yes, I made a mistake, and we're going to fix it, and we're going to keep it moving, because learning is like something you do forever. Like you don't ever stop. And so it was just like taking all these different approaches to reach more people, to, really like spread this information in a way that wasn't jargony, like what I had been reading or like learning about like in college, because that was like really annoying to hear people talk like about theory and like in such a way that was so disconnected from like the experiences that I had had. So yeah, I mean, I feel like it's worked. I think it's been good, but
Can
yeah.
confirm. Can confirm that it has worked. That's awesome. And I
Mm-hmm.
completely agree with the jargony stuff. Like while I was in my master's program, there were so many times where I felt like the study that we were reading or the research that we were checking out like did not match people's real experiences. And I was always just like, okay, like the scientists and the researchers are completely disconnected from like what people are actually needing, and like there's something missing here, but like there's not a translation piece of like, oh, now that we have this information, this is what we can do with it to like actually impact people's lives for the better. um
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's just kind of like it's almost like I feel like academia sometimes like does a thing where it's like, okay, this is like my little passion project, but I'm actually not going to take these findings to like better these communities. It's like just me. And then I'm like you're not going to be able to read the study if you don't like pay for like whatever.
Yes,
So,
exactly. Let's get into your PCast. Tahana Feminist. Is PCast not kosher? let's call it a podcast. And your platform, right? Tahana Feminist. So
mhm.
I want to know like what's your mission? Who do you like have on? What do you talk about? And how can listeners who are listening right now hear more from you?
Sure. So yeah, like I was saying, Tahana Feminist Talks is like an extension of like my brand, if you will, Tahana
Oh, I
Feminist.
will.
um, and basically, I interview young Texans who are doing the work in their communities because I think people need to hear about it and like it's really important. And whether you know it or not, like there are people who are like advocating and like fighting for the change that they want to see. Um, and so I've been doing that, and I also like read books or cover different topics that I do like extensive research on, and then I'm like, okay, let's take all this and like actually make it so people understand what I'm talking about. And that's been really fun. Like I think that it's just been really rewarding to see people like say like, oh, I like didn't know that, or this episode like I referred back to it because of whatever is going on. Um, so that's kind of what I've been doing, and the like first season, if you will, is like over, but I am planning on bringing it back in like November, December, and like keeping that same like structure of like interviewing young people here in Texas and also covering other topics that I'm interested in, that other people are interested in, so that we can learn together. And you can listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's just Tahana Feminist Talks. And on Instagram, it's at TF Talks Podcast.
I am just consistently in awe of you and just am so like I don't have like any right to be proud, but like
Oh
am proud and just like think it's so cool that you like heard our podcast and like reached out to us and you're like I like your podcast and then like applied to our role like for our social media intern and like now we're connected and I just want to like support you in like everything that you're doing because I feel like we need more young people that are doing the things that you're doing at the effort level that you're doing it and I'm just so like in awe of your like work and your strategy and like your ability to really like get messages out there in a way that's creative and fun and informative and important and I just love you. So there's
my,
that.
oh my God, Danielle, don't. I'm literally gonna cry.
Leslie, okay, we have one question left. And I'm
Okay.
so curious about this because I don't think we've ever really talked about this like in our meetings and stuff. But I want to
Mm-hmm.
know like what your career goals are. Like what do you want for yourself? What do you want for sex ed in Texas? Like where do you see yourself within this like huge field that is kind of like up and coming in the sense that like more people are paying attention I feel like now than ever
Mm-hmm.
to sex ed. So like where do you see yourself in this puzzle?
Yeah. Okay, like personal career goals, I feel really happy where I'm at right now, but I do want to find ways to incorporate like physical art into my repro work because it's something that I've like really like just like stepped away from for so long. And when I was younger, I wanted to do art education, and I'm still like thinking of pursuing at some point in time art therapy. But I really want to like bridge the two, so that would be really cool. And I mean, I feel like I don't know, like in terms of sex ed, obviously, like I want to see like a complete change in like the curriculum in Texas. Like that would be like chef's kiss, you know. Um, but at the very least, if that doesn't happen, I hope that the State Board of Education realizes that there will be pushback if they choose to be on the wrong side of history. Like people, like our communities are going to take matters into our own hands and create networks to like disperse this information because it's been like taboo for so long. You know, it's been shamed and like stigmatized, and like we're tired of it. Um, and I also like think that like this doesn't just apply to like sex ed, but I feel like we're really like at a point right now, especially with COVID, that like we understand the value of showing up for our communities. So if we don't like see the change that we like want or need or deserve, like we know that like we have the power to create it ourselves, and even more so like outside of these systems, and we're gonna do it. So like that is, I feel like, what I am thinking about in terms of sex ed in Texas, but also like just in general, like change is like gonna come whether people want it to or not.
Sex Ed with DB is supported by Pandia Health, the only doctor-led birth control delivery company. Here are some fun facts about Pandia Health. Most birth control is free with insurance, or for $15 per pack without. Your birth control comes with free delivery and free goodies, and you can get an online doctor visit if you need it, which is perfect during COVID-19. Go to pandiahealth.com, that's PANDIA health.com, and use code SEXEDFREE to get a free telemedicine appointment for the first 50 people who sign up. Offer only valid in Arizona, California, Florida, Texas, and Wyoming. If you're someone in a long-distance relationship, quarantine can be especially difficult without your boo. What if you could have an exact replica of your partner's penis or vulva to use as a sex toy? While the year 2020 certifiably blows, at least we have Clone-A-Willy to make our LDR dreams come true. Intrigued? Learn more at www.cloneawilly.com and use promo code SEXED20 for 20% off your purchase. Our creator, co-producer, sound engineer, and host is me, Danielle Bezalel, aka DB. Our co-producer and communications lead is Cathren Cohen. Our main logo and banner graphic were created by Andrea Forgacs. Our social media intern is Leslie Lopez. Our music theme is by Hook Sounds. Our ad music is by my stepdad, Bill Gant. Thank you so much to our featured guests, partners, and our listeners. If you're interested in advertising with us, email us at sexedwithdb@gmail.com. For more sex ed content, follow us on Insta @sexedwithdbpodcast. Tune in next time.